Ready to go? Give everybody just a couple minutes to jump on here and we'll go ahead and get started. So if you're getting on board here, looks like we've got a dozen people already on. Thank y'all for joining tonight for our digital fly tying night. Tonight we are going to be doing the big fat ant. So one of my favorite ant patterns for the high country here. I'll throw one in the vise and kind of flash over that while we let everybody else get on here. It's going to look like that right there. Just a nice little ant pattern for either sunfish and small other panfish species here in Central Texas. You can use it abroad for other things as well. It was really originally designed as a trout fly, but we're going to go through that tonight, kind of go through the tying process. Y'all can follow along or tie along, whichever you so choose. But nonetheless, thank y'all for joining us tonight. Hopefully wherever you're at, the viewers tonight are hopefully not in severe weather. That is the hope. We got a lot of very severe weather just north of us, but we're good at the moment here, so we shall see what happens. But tonight we're going to go ahead and get started. We're just a minute past, so we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Hopefully everybody is getting used to the new YouTube platform. I know I am. I'm trying to make the adjustments. If you would, there is a chat feature here as well, and just so everybody can do that there. Let's see, what do we have? Very good, man. Thanks for driving over. We had somebody on here say they drove over from College Station to check the shop out, so thank you so much for that. And always appreciate when people make the drive to come all the way out here and check the fly shop out. Hopefully you did a little fishing while you were here as well. But I'll try my best to get to the chat and answer as many questions as I can. The chat's kind of over here, so if you see me looking that way, that's the reason for it. But tonight, what we're going to do is go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and move it over to the fly tying camera for those that are tuning in to tie along. The whole basis of this fly is this right here. And that is a TMC 101 hook. I'm going to do it in a size 12. And you know, that's the fun thing about doing things live as opposed to pre-recorded is, like, if I'm ever going to make a mistake on this thing, it's going to be tonight. I will break my thread. I'll, pop a hook out of the vise. Something's going to happen. But I do like this hook a lot. It's basically a 1X fine hook. It's nothing all that original in the form of it's a standard dry fly hook. But the 101, honestly, I love the straight eye. I've always really liked the straight eye on the 101. It's been a long time favorite of mine. Thread-wise, I'm tying with a 14-aught Veevus. You can see my label's getting a little tired there. You could use a 12-aught. You could use a 14-aught. If you're really good with space management, you could use a 10-aught. But nonetheless, man, we got all these people from Florida tuning in tonight. So sorry we're tying little bitty ants, but panfish out there love ants. Y'all just need to upsize it a little bit. So the size 12 would get it done, but you might need to go a little bigger for some of your fish a little further south. But nonetheless, here what we're going to do is just start out with that 14. This is in kind of a burnt or rusty orange, burnt orange, rusty brown. I don't care what it is, honestly. But just give yourself a little bit there. You can just yank that off to pop it off. That's what the cool kids do. I'm not really that cool, but in fact, I'm kind of surprised I didn't break the other one. But nonetheless, we're going to just take this thread and migrate it back towards the bend of the hook. That's all we want to do is get that right into the bend. The whole basis of this fly is the fact that it is loaded with foam. It floats great. It's got a great profile. This is just 2mm standard stuff, fly foam, and nothing overly fancy here. This is not anything that's just way over the top on this. You can get this stuff anywhere and everywhere. But basically you want a strip that's roughly about the width of the gape of the hook. So that's pretty close. I might be it's almost exact. And I freehand cut that, so I'm feeling really good right now. I'm not sophisticated enough to measure stuff and do all that. So, but here's what we're gonna do. Let me see if I can get that guy out of there. We're gonna do this right here. I'm gonna take this foam and actually squeeze it just a little bit, just to kind of really get it to loosen up a little bit. Foams can be really, really stiff when you pull them out of the package. The only negative with that is when you go to tie them in, they'll want to cut. So here, I'm going to tie that foam strip in just right in the middle is all I'm going to do. Just a couple of wraps here. Tighten that down. Try not to cut the foam. Try not to break your thread. Those are really the only stipulations. But you're tying that in right there in the middle. So that's what we're after there. While holding tension with the thread, move forward just a few wraps here. We're going to get probably just right in front of the barb is really about where I like to do this first one. kind of take the front portion of this, and all we're going to do is cross the thread over right in front of my fingers there to form a little bump just like that. That right there is going to be part of our ant body. I would recommend you kind of pull this back just a little bit, make a few wraps further forward, not as many, because here we want to save on space just a little bit. Making another wrap right here. I normally make this little ball a little bit smaller here, so you have kind of a larger bump in the back, smaller one to the front here, and we're going to pull this over in just a second. So that's all we really need for this portion right here. Once you've done so, get the thread in front. Take your scissors, pull this up, trim this as close as you can get it without actually losing control of stuff. You don't want to cause the foam to break and cause it to slip out from under the thread or anything like that. So all we're going to do here is just make a wrap or two to kind of tie down a little bit of that loose end. I'll polish this up in just a minute, but that's what we want right there for the initial. Take that other piece of foam that we were talking about. We're going to simply make it almost like a shell back, kind of pushing it forward. Make a couple of wraps, just like so. While pulling that rearward, I'm going to just make a few wraps to keep thread tension. I'm going to come in here and trim that real nice and tight. Now that is forming the rear of our ant. That's a really, really nice fat-bodied ant. And that is exactly what we're after on this, is just that really, really full-bodied ant pattern. Exactly it. Bill Trussell was the original creator on this fly, and Bill's a good friend of mine. And Bill created this fly originally. This is not one of my original patterns. This is one that Bill turned me on to, and I just fell in love with it. And I still think it's the greatest ant pattern I've ever fished. But he turned me on to this, and this fly really was designed to float extraordinarily high and to really ride over heavier water and be a little bit more of a, I like his words, he goes, I wanted it to be a caloric gain for any trout that wanted to eat it, where they really did view it as something that they kind of felt like they were getting away with eating a Big Mac or something, you know, where it was just a really, really hefty bite of something for these fish. So we're going to start out, like I said, with that black foam. We're now going to go move to a brown. I'm going to tie this in the Carpenter ant coloration tonight. I have 3 colorations that I tie this in and that are available through Umpqua Feather Merchants. The original one was Fire Ant. And so the big fat ant actually was tied originally with red thread and had that red head on it as well. And Bill has caught trout everywhere you can catch trout with that pattern, and so it quickly became a favorite in his box, and that's one of the reasons that I stuck the original Fire Ant pattern still in there, because I wanted to, not only does it work like a champ, but you got to pay homage to the original. I fished this a lot in this Carpenter ant pattern and in just a straight black. All I'm doing here is I just tied that foam out to where it pokes out the front. This is about the same width. I normally try to make the head just a touch narrower, and all I'm going to do here is kind of make a little bump. See how I'm just going to double it over about like that. Come right up over it like that. That's all we need. A couple of wraps, centered up, pull nice and tight, don't break your thread. While holding thread tension, make sure you pull behind it. I normally just make a couple of wraps there to make sure everything stays in place. Same story, come in here, trim that nice and tight. And don't worry, we're about to cover all that up with Hackle and everything else. If you feel so led, you can, wrap down any of your loose ends if you want to. Not a huge push there, but now we've got a little ant head and a little ant body. That's exactly what we're looking for. And if somebody would do me a favor, being this is our first kind of online live tying night, somebody in the chat, if you wouldn't mind letting me know, how's the sound? I want to make sure that sound's good for everybody. Since we're using a different platform, I want to make sure that everything's as it should be. So just let me know on that. So all we're going to do after we tie that little foam head in, we're going to migrate our foam rearwards here, about right where we kind of finished up tying off that foam. And we're going to add, you can use a number of materials here. You can use Arrow Wing, which is a discontinued material from Tiemco. You can use Ultra Dry yarn from Fulling Mill. This stuff is really cool. You can use Antron yarn. You can use polypropylene. You can use anything that you want. EP fibers, they've got that trigger point fiber. I use that a lot on this fly. There is no right or wrong here in terms of what wing you want to use. I use CDC on some of these. So honestly, just something that's going to make a wing that you can see. is going to be really helpful. So I'm going to use this in kind of a light tan here. And all I'm going to do, this is pretty straightforward and simple, just make that loose loop wrap and just wrap rearwards on this, stroke the other one over and wrap back towards it as well. Where basically we're going to hold this rearwards and pile up the thread against it, kind of ramping that thread up the material ever so slightly. So you'll see how that's just making a little bit of a thread ramp that goes up that material, and we've got exactly what we want. It basically comes out right there at the foam. That's awesome. Thank y'all. Okay, good. Everybody says sound is good. So this is the first one. So we could like record some of these. I mean, the quality is going to be a lot better than it was on Zoom doing these, but at the same time, we have like actual 4K videos of how to tie this fly. So whether or not this one lives in perpetuity is another matter altogether. All right, next steps. You need to find yourself some really good looking hackle. And if you don't have really good looking hackle, you should be getting Whiting Farms. So Whiting Farms is a Hebert miner. This is just a medium brown for those that are wondering. So it's a really nice silver cape. The grade is not overly important here as we're going to be tying with a size 12, so nothing super small is necessary. I know y'all can't see this, but just a little bit that way is the window outside the shop, and I'm looking out and it's getting ominously dark outside. So we're gonna finish this up before everything breaks loose, man. All right, so here what we're gonna do is just simply tie our hackle in. Just a loose loop is fine. Take that, ramp this up the little deal towards your wing there. You're good. Wrap back down. That's the one thing about YouTube Live is I can't really tell who's on here. It just tells me I have viewers. It doesn't tell me how many. So since Jeff Holter's on here, I feel somewhat obligated since he commented, "Hi, Jeff." And for those of you that are not familiar with that habit, you should come in the fly shop more when Jeff is here, and you'll very quickly become accustomed to it. It's a ritual that has been going on for years. So, all right, we've added our little medium brown hackle in there. You will notice your wing will want to stick to it. Just make sure that those two don't become friends. That's all you want to do is make sure that they kind of stay apart from each other. I'm not too worried if the hackle kicks forward. So see how it's actually going to kick forward and reverse? I don't mind that on this fly. If you want to wrap it the other way, it'll kick the other direction. I'm really ambivalent on that on this fly. If I was tying it for show, I'd probably make sure that it kicked, rearward. But honestly, it looks great both ways because it's really stacked hackle between the foams. So give yourself a little grace. I mean, I literally have the power right now to make it go whichever way I want, and I'll probably kick it forward just to have fun with it. So here we're going to tie in round rubber legs. This is a rubber leg that is just round rubber in a size small. And I'm going to place one of these. I can move it wherever I want and then really cinch down on it to make sure that it's going where I want. But basically you want it right there. Right there in that little bare thread saddle is all we're after. And just for those that don't know this material, it is a round rubber leg in small. Just like that. That is what we're after. We're going to repeat that same process on the opposite side as well. Take that, move the leg into the position you want it. Just a word to the wise here. I've always found it, if you tie these in real nice and firm, they don't really move a lot on you. But once you tie that hackle in, do be aware, you can make these things do whatever you want once you really crank that hackle in on them. But that's about what I want, where those legs are going to be kind of pushed to the sides, making that little X. It's okay if they push down. The hackle is also going to help kind of keep them up. Here I'm going to stroke these legs back, move my thread forward right behind that little head, making sure everything's exactly where I want it. So now we are ready for our hackle wraps. So hopefully everybody's following along and everybody's good to go here. I'm going to take this wing and make sure that it's not getting happy with my hackle here. And all we're going to do is take that hackle. If you have hackle pliers, now's a good time to use them. If you don't worry about it. Just use a long hackle or a saddle or something like that and you won't have to worry about it. But all we're doing, I'm just doing this nice and slow so everybody can see we're pulling a leg forward and we're just going to cross the hackle right one in front of the other. So here, pull it, and we're going to wrap that right up against those legs. Now you can see it's going to want to push those legs forward. I'm going to take the legs and pull them back and cross the hackle over them. What that now is going to do is it's going to force those legs back just a little bit, and that's what I want. I still want this thing to kind of keep that X profile. If you want, you've got a lot of feather here, and if you want this thing to float even higher, I don't mind people stacking hackle right there in that section, that's fine. But I don't want too much or it's going to cause this real big gap in the legs, and we just don't want that. So here, I'm going to pull this and jump in front of my front two legs right here. So jump in front, don't overwrap because you don't want to overfill it. All you got to do is just make a couple securing wraps right there behind the head. We are good to go. So legs out the side, position them, make them sure they're right where they want. So that's looking good. Everything looks exactly how I want it. Hackle's now tied in, all is well there. I would advise this, if you can see it, and this is going to be a little hard to see on camera, but you can actually take that thread, and at this point, you can jump it right behind that hook eye, to where all of our whip finishing now is separate from the fly. It's now independent right there behind the hook eye. Just take a little whip finish, and you can take that right there, slide her off, our fly is done. You can add a second one just for a security measure if you so feel like it. But with that, our work here is done. Snip that, come in here with the hackle, take your scissors, little word to the wise, just put them very narrowly in there. See how they're just barely open? Give the smallest snip, you don't have to worry about cutting stuff you didn't want to because the scissors will function as a guard as you push down into that hackle. Here I don't leave my wing this long, I normally try to do that, just big enough to where I can see it, and it functions as a little ant wing. I'm going to come in here and trim my legs off at the length I want them. Make sure they are positioned where I want them as well. And that right there is pretty close. That front leg right there is a little long, but we're good. That's it. That right there is pretty much a finished big fat ant. So we can credit Bill Trussell for the just ingeniousness of this pattern originally. This thing it's awesome. I love this ant pattern. It does such a wonderful job of floating high, being irresistible to fish. Everything eats it. Everything eats it, man. I've caught bass on it. We catch panfish on it. We catch cutthroats on it up in the western states. You can catch brook trout on it out east. You go wherever you want. And what I do personally is I know we used all that really nice hackle and we're just going to go ahead and trim it off. There's a reason for that. I like this fly to float flush. So what I'm going to do is slide this in there. Watch your legs. It's somewhat important, but that's how I want mine to ride right there. I want it to look just like that. Legs push forward, got that nice profile. It's going to ride nice and flush on the surface of the water. Hook is going to sink below water surface where the hackle isn't propping it up. A flush floating version of this just is amazing. It does such a great job. Fishing it, would I recommend a loop knot or a clinch knot? I am to the point now in my life, and I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or if it's just because I started, I don't know. I really don't know why. I tie everything on with a loop knot now. I just love the motion that you get from it. I love the fact that you wind up getting just this really great presentation in moving water, that the fly wobbles a lot, it moves back and forth. And if you're doing so with fluorocarbon, you don't really have a whole lot of issues with them seeing that loop, because it is going to typically be right there at the fly and sink below the surface of the water a little bit. And I mean, I've never found it to be a deterrent. If anything, it just helps. And so that right there, I do everything with a loop knot. You could tie a clinch on this just fine. 4 and 5X, the fish don't usually get too finicky about that, but that's what I would do personally. So I think whatever you're comfortable with knot-wise, do that. But here I typically will use a little loop knot just to generate more motion. So very good. I'll take some questions if you've got any, and I'll rip through another one of these as well. So we can do one more on here for everybody that's watching. Wants to tie along, but I can still see the question board over here, so please don't hesitate to ask. If you've got any questions about the tying process or anything like that, or if there was something I didn't explain, or if I explained something poorly, that's also a very real possibility. So anything like that. Hopefully, if you are viewing locally, y'all are making plans, provided we don't get rained out with this humdinger of a thunderstorm that's out the window. But hopefully y'all are making plans to fish the cichlid tournament this weekend. So we have a Rio Grande cichlid tournament. If you heard that little squeaking noise, that was me restarting my thread through my bobbin. Apparently it fell out somewhere along the way. Take that guy, pop him off, bring this thread back down to the bend of the hook, just like we had the last one. Oh, very good. Awesome. Ben, I'm glad to hear that the trolling motor worked out. A lot of people don't know this, but like I used to work at a big box store that sold trolling motors and depth finders, and we did tournament bass gear and all that sort of stuff. And I used to tournament fish a lot, and so I know my way around the bass side of things as well. So I had some trolling motor questions that came through. Ben was looking for something, and getting those stern drive trolling motors with that 80-pound thrust, man, it'll move a boat. It'll move a boat in a hurry. Anytime your thread starts to kind of, you can see how it's starting to kind of get a little wide right there at the hook. You just spin your bobbin, and it will actually cord your thread back up. So by keeping that bobbin spinning, it records that thread, makes it a little bit more of an accurate tie-in too. Here's our foam. I'll measure that on this side. You can see that it's roughly about as wide as the hook gape is there. That's all we're after. Take this guy, I normally squeeze it at the tie-in point right there. Tying into the bend of the hook is definitely recommended here. It gives you a little bit more space to do things. Making a few wraps there, pulling tight. Don't cut your foam and don't break your thread. That's, like I said, the only two things you got to live by. That's it. Make a few wraps forward. About right there needs to be your first bump. And you can control the size of these bumps a lot of times by pulling the foam tighter or bunching it up on itself. So if you want that bump to be a little smaller, great. Don't advance the thread so far forward and you'll be fine. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just pull this backwards to where it forces that little bump rearwards, making sure I've got a thread base here to where the color of that thread shows through underneath the hook. And I do have a question over here. Would this be good for a dry dropper option? Absolutely. There is enough foam on this thing that it will float a small dropper. I wouldn't go and do like the heaviest one known to mankind, but if it was like a small tungsten dropper, just a little beaded dropper, you'd be fine. And if it's weightless, it's of course a no-brainer. You could make that happen all day long. But yeah, dry dropper option on something like this, as long as you can see it, it'll serve as a really good attractor fly, and will also serve as a really good dropper as well. Making sure I move my thread in front of that. All I'm doing is pulling that foam tight, slipping my scissors in, giving it a trim. That's it. Again, not too overly concerned about cleaning this up like in the highest order, but I mean just kind of finishing it up a little bit. You can see how it's now a little cleaner than it was. I'm going to take this foam, pull it over the back, just like so. Once I've done that, I'm going to really try to force that thread right into that same position. Tie-in point, little pull, hold the thread tight while pulling the foam rearwards. You can see I can now tie down the rest of that all nice and neat. That gives us our ant body. Come in here, trim that guy off, and there's our little ant body for the rear. If you want, you can trim those little corners off. Just be careful not to nick the rest of your foam. And honestly, like, that's tied in well. You don't really have to clean that up. But if you wanted to, you could put a couple of wraps in there if you so saw fit. So that little body there is done. Come up to the front of the fly. We're going to take that brown foam. So that was, and just so you know, this is a 2mm. So that's a 2mm foam in black is what we just used. If anybody is tuning in just now. And then now we're going to use the same equivalent, that 2mm foam in a brown. And I already have a little piece cut here from the last one. We're simply going to tie that in right here behind the eye. Couple of wraps there, pulling firmly. Once we've done so, I normally pull this piece forward, make sure I maintain thread tension through that. I just want that to stick real nice and neat. Once I've done so, I can trim this guy off and then take this guy and double it over. And that just makes that nice, neat little ant head. That's all you're after. Little ant head right there, we're good. No problems whatsoever. Take that, stretch it, trim it. And this one, if you can, it is good to try to clean it up a little bit. It's a little easier being that it is a smaller piece of foam. But that just makes that perfect little ant head just like that. I love the way that looks. And it just has such a great profile in the water as well. All right, same deal. And like we mentioned earlier, it can be Antron, it can be McFlylon, it can be whatever. I mean, it can be whatever you want as a wing material. You just simply tie that in, double it over, wrap back on it. And I'm just going to ramp that up the foam is all I'm doing here. Just making sure I've got that nice, neat little thread ramp that keeps everything all hemmed in nice and neat. So now there's a very smooth transition. That's really for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's going to look better. Number two, it's going to allow my hackle to step down that a lot easier than if I had a step off point and I would lose tension. So next things next, we're going to find us a good hackle here. So again, just a good brown hackle. This is a medium brown, but it does have a it does have kind of a black center list. So that center portion of the feather is going to be a little bit more black than what I would normally see. But we're going to grab one of these guys. This looks about the right size. We'll check it. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to prep that feather for tie-in. I normally cut the downy portion off, leaving me that little exposed portion there. Come in here with your scissors. Trim those. See if I can get this and do it on camera. There we go. Trim that and that. Takes a steady hand, and it's also very hard to do that way when you're trying to show the camera. All right, all we're going to do, make a loose loop over, make sure it holds those barbs in place. That keeps your feather from pulling out. So a lot of people, they'll tie, and I would recommend doing this that way on your woolly buggers as well, just because those little barbs, when you trim them short like that, they prevent this feather from coming loose at any point during that tying process. Trim the rest of that little stem off, wrap that down nice and neat. Everything should be good there. And right in that little saddle, we're going to tie our legs in. And those are just round rubber legs and a small brown. That is it. It is looking very ominous outside. I'm telling you, man, we shall see what happens. I was scheduled to go sight fishing for cichlids tomorrow, so I'm kind of hoping that I went and did a little scouting this morning on Brushy Creek, and the cichlids were everywhere. They finally popped off, so I am ready to get out there and go pester some of them, but when the water's muddy, it makes it really hard to do that. All right, take your legs, position them where you want them. Just kind of slide them around for the proper positions. Pull nice and tight. If you'll notice, those legs should make a nice X right there at the tie-in point. While keeping thread tension, pull these legs back and bring your thread right up behind the foam. If you did it right, you should have something like this. That should be it. All right, again, if you want to, you can use your hackle pliers. If you'd rather not, you don't have to. Nobody's making you. It's a free country. Here what we're going to do is pull this leg forward and simply wrap the hackle forward as well. So the trickiest part is just navigating the hackle through the legs. That's literally it. About right there. I'm going to be very careful on this wrap because that's kind of the step-off wrap. And here's where I'm going to pull the hackle through. Right here. And you can see how those are wanting to kick forward now. I'm going to double my wraps back just a little bit to force that leg back rearward. It's okay to move your hackle through itself. But see, now that leg wanted to push forward, and by wrapping my hackle back on it, it is no longer given that option. And so it does force those rear legs back in the position that I want them. Once I've done so, all by doing so is I'm just crossing back through there. I'm kind of happy with where everything is here, so I'm going to go ahead and jump this hackle in front and just fill that space. That's all I'm doing. It doesn't have to be super heavy hackled. Fill that space. Make a couple securing wraps. Pull nice and tight. Again, cross the thread up and get it by that. And you'll notice that the legs, you can now manipulate them through the hackle. They will go wherever you want them to go. So that looks absolutely perfect. That's all I need. So here, if you wanted to trim it, you sure can. Just close your scissors. Use just the tip. Trim that off. That way you don't trim anything you didn't want to. Trim the wing just short enough to where you can see it. That's pretty good there. I'll come back and mess with the legs in just a second after I throw a whip finish on here. Ben Alexander said they just lost power. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that going on just north of me. I am positive. And that's it right there. Just a couple little whip finishes and you have a finished big fat ant. All we got to do is come in here and trim the legs. Position them where we want them. And that's it right there. That's the profile. That's the last thing the trout's going to see before he sees the flash off your camera. So that is exactly what we're after. Final thing, we're going to come in here and trim it nice and flush. That's it. So we got a nice little flush cut on the bottom. Very, very simple pattern. This is not complicated to tie. It's not very material intensive either. So from a standpoint of complexity, it's not that bad. But then on the other side of things, it's also just not that expensive of a tie. The most expensive part is getting good hackle. And so hopefully you've bought at this point some sort of dry fly hackle somewhere along the way. So that's more or less what we're after. So any questions? I'd like to see what anybody else wants as far as that. Dutch Boffman. Thanks, Chris. Very nice pattern. And hey, Jeff. Very good. So definitely have some of that going on. There's a little bit of hi, Jeff out there. So, but yeah, I love this pattern. And I have to throw the credit all to Bill Trussell. Just an amazing tie. I called him actually when I was looking at producing this fly for Umpqua. I just said, look, I love this pattern. It's in my guide box. I fish it down here. I fish it out west. It's just my absolute favorite ant pattern. Do you have any interest in submitting it to Umpqua? And he goes, no, but you can do it. And I was like, are you sure? So we traded some really nice hackles and we reached an agreement. And so that worked out. But I love this pattern. It is just so effective out west. And I mean, when we have fish that are refusing other patterns, we can throw these ants on and they'll eat them like crazy. Jimbo Roberts. Yep, there's a big line. Yeah, by the way, I would fish that ant anywhere. So yeah, we're kind of in the middle of thunderstorm warning stuff here, but yeah, we're watching the weather closely. So I have a front row seat right out that way. Is a lot of black clouds. But yeah, this ant, man, I tell you what, when you get up in the high country, it's incredible. The spruce moths and the ants and the hoppers, a lot of people, they're so used to doing the stonefly, mayfly, midge, caddis thing, and they get stuck in those 4 food groups. And when you start looking at terrestrial insects, like even your spruce moth fall, when those spruce moths hit the water, they don't even need to eat anything else. I've caught cutthroats that are so full of spruce moths, you can actually run your hand along their belly and feel it's like rippled because there's all these little bumps and dimples all in it from how many moths are packed into their stomach. When they get on ants, in fact, I should have had the picture queued up. I have a picture of a cutthroat that I caught on a caddis. It was a little white caddis that imitates a spruce moth, actually. And so it was a caddis pattern, a little mimic sedge of mine, and like a size 14 or 16 in a cream, which is perfect for a moth. Threw it in there, cutthroat ate it, great fish, one of the best ones I've ever landed in that creek. In the photos, I'm holding it in the net, and I took a couple photos with my phone, and there's a carpenter ant still in its mouth, an actual live carpenter ant that it had eaten just before it ate my caddis. And so that's pretty cool that they can literally they're such an opportunistic eat that they can switch on and off like that. But I mean, just little things like this where you've got these just nice little morsels of high protein diet right there that as soon as that thing hits the water, they are going to absolutely smoke it. They love these things. So I'll be guiding with these in Colorado this summer. I'll fish them down here. I'll probably throw some on Brushy Creek in a couple of weeks. So, and don't let, that's another thing I see a lot of people make the mistake of in Texas. That would be this. Our ants, everybody thinks fire ants. They're like, oh, our ants are really small. If you go around a creek or anywhere there's like rotted or decomposing wood and go kind of comb through that, this size 12 right here, I mean, this is in relationship to my finger. Like, honestly, I have seen ants bigger than this in decomposing logs and wood and things like that. So just be aware that this, I mean, we have big ants in Texas too. Those carpenter and wood ants do get pretty good size. So just be aware that that is definitely there. Let me check the chat here. We got a couple people. Yeah, Jimbo said he had a really good day on the Gallatin fishing spruce moths. If you hit it right, it's one of God's greatest gifts to the trout angler, is when the moths are coming out of the tree, especially if you get a little bit of a wind, it knocks them out, they hit the water, it doesn't get a whole lot better. So yeah, the moth fall is amazing, and I'm right there with ants, man. This is such a deadly summertime pattern out west, and we are, I mean, right now it's coming into this here. I mean, it's already warm enough we should be fishing this stuff. So y'all get out there, do not hesitate to go throw a few of these on your favorite panfish haunt. I think you will like the results. I think you will like what you see, and hopefully like what's in your net. But I will take a couple more seconds if anybody's got any questions. let me know. Otherwise, we've tied a couple of flies. It was pretty straightforward, pretty easy. But yeah, let me know if y'all have got anything and we can go from there. So I will give it a good old going once, going twice, because, you know, typing takes time. It's not just like chiming in and saying, hey, you know, slipping up a hand. So hopefully everybody's safe and sound. I know we got a line of storms coming through Texas, so hopefully everybody's safe and sound tonight. Thank you all for joining in. And for those of you that are out of state or out of town, I'm glad we can do this sort of stuff. It's awesome. I'm really glad that we have the ability to reach out beyond the walls of the fly shop and make sure that you folks really do get to see a lot of what we enjoy doing in here. So hopefully you get to visit the shop when you come by next, but otherwise, keep tuning into these. We'll have, I don't remember what our next online class is. I think June is actually our Fly Fish Southern Colorado, so we'll be doing that. So, all right, well, thank you so much, y'all. I've just got a bunch of thank yous over here and nothing else, so really appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for joining, and for those of you that don't have it on your calendar, we'll kind of watch the weather, but if we don't get a deluge of rain tonight, cichlid tournament's on for Saturday, so hopefully see a bunch of y'all here at the shop. We'll catch some cichlids for Texas Parks and Wildlife and record some data and see if we can't find some information that they don't know yet. So thank y'all, have a great evening, and we'll catch you on